Now let's look at some tips, tricks, and tools when you're working with keyframes. The first tip is to use this search bar. So you can type things into the search bar like stroke width. Even if I just start typing stroke, it'll bring up stroke width, which is nice instead of having to toggle down. And this way you can more quickly get to the properties that you need to set keyframes on and set those keyframes. Or another thing that's always a pain to have to toggle down to find is path. So instead you could just search for path and then it will bring up all things with the path property. Or if you didn't want to have to scroll through because you were only looking for the path on a certain layer, you can just select that layer and then type in path and it'll only bring up whatever you're searching for in that one layer. You can do this with multiple layers selected too. If you use a certain search often, you can save it for quicker access. So if you hit this little magnifying glass here, then the last thing that you search for is going to be at the top here, and just shift click on that to save it in this list. Also, if you want quick access to the search bar, you can just hit Command F, and then you can start typing or click to make your selection. This doesn't necessarily have to do with setting keyframes, but while we're on the topic of search, you can also search in the project panel. So I could search for tentacle to bring up all the comps called tentacle or something similar. You can also search for the names of layers or comps within the timeline. And another time that search can be really helpful is if you're looking for missing files. I'm not going to have any in this project, but if you search for missing, you can search for missing effects, fonts, footage, or even things that are unused or used. So it can be pretty helpful just to search for different kinds of compositions or layers within either your project panel or your timeline. When you're setting keyframes, you can type in math into the values fields. So let's take a look at an example. So I'm just going to duplicate this jellyfish by hitting Command D, P to bring up the position property, and then let's say I want to move this second jellyfish over by 200 pixels. So I'm just going to select the value, make sure my cursor is not going to cause this to be deleted, and then hit plus, and then 200, and enter. And now you can see that it's moved the jellyfish over. So you can do this with any different property. You can do it while you're setting keyframes, or if you just want to space things out evenly across your composition. What if you want to know the amount of time between a set of keyframes? For instance, what if I need to know the amount of time between these two keyframes so that I can maybe make another animation that is also this amount of time? Well, I could put my playhead here, figure out that that's happening at 1 second and 2 frames, and then this is happening at 1 second and 10 frames, and then do the math. Or another way to do this without doing math is to option click on your first keyframe, then option click on your second keyframe, and look in your info panel. And this will tell you the duration between the keyframes. You can also do the same thing to find the distance between your two markers. So just option click the first marker, option click the second marker, and these are going to be 12 frames apart. You can't unfortunately do this if your markers are on the composition. It won't work between these. Let's take a look at how you can stretch or shrink the amount of time between keyframes to either slow down or speed up your animation. So ignore how this whole thing is set up. This is one of the tentacles of the jellyfish. All you need to know about this composition is that these keyframes are controlling the waviness of the tentacle. So right now it's going this speed. What if I want to make them go faster? So what I need to do is just drag and select all of these keyframes. I'm going to position my playhead at the beginning, and then I'm going to go down to the last keyframe, and I'm just going to hold down Option and drag these towards the left, and that's going to shrink these keyframes. And so now when I play this back, it's going to go a lot faster. And now this duration that I've set for my work area is not the perfect amount of time for a loop, so that's why you see it kind of jumping, because I've adjusted the timing of the keyframes. So if I undo that, we can also go in the opposite direction. So if I pull these to the right, this is going to slow down the animation. So let's just play a bit of that back. And you can see that this is going much slower. You can also adjust timing of keyframes in the graph editor. So with your keyframe selected, you can just go into the graph editor and then click and drag to select your graph. Then you should get this box. If you don't, make sure that you have this little icon, the transform box, turned on, and then you can adjust either by pulling horizontally to adjust the timing between keyframes, or you can even adjust vertically to make the keyframes themselves bigger or smaller values. So this is going to make this tentacle more wavy. It's going to be bending out more because I just brought these keyframes down, which is bigger in value.